Welcome to Draft Sickos on the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed. I'm your host, Maxwell Baumbach, and this is the show where we cover everybody from the biggest names to the deepest sleepers. This week's special guest real star of the show, you know him from NBA Big Board, and if you are on Twitter, you know him as Mavs Drafts. He's Richard Stamen. Rich, how are you doing tonight?
Hey, it's good to be here. I'm excited. I've long-time listener, first-time caller, so I'm excited.
For sure. We're glad to have you on. We are big fans of everything that you guys do over at NBA Big Board. NBA Big Board is a site that obviously has a lot of momentum behind it. You know, it's a site started by Chad Ford, Rafael Barlow, kind of continuing on in that legacy, a guy who is deep in the weeds, world traveled as a scout, and the work that everybody does over there is phenomenal. You guys have always been really supportive of us and what we do over here. So anytime we get to kind of commingle a little bit, do a little cross promotion, we're here for it. So an absolute pleasure. And if somehow you've not come across NBA Big Board, make sure you're taking a look at what they're doing over there. You're subscribed over there. So let's kick things off with winners of the week. Want to go in a bit of a different direction, kind of pick your brain and talk out a guy that I was kind of higher on earlier in the year. I think I faded a little bit, and now I'm a little confused, to be frank. So he's a guy I'm interested to talk out with you, and that is Ron Holland of the G League Ignite. He is a 6'8" wing, young for the class. Doesn't turn 29 until July. Had a big outing this week against the Rip City Remix. In 29 minutes, he dropped 31 points, 4 for 6 from 3, 6 boards, 2 assists, 2 steals, and a block. Holland came into the year very highly touted. Was the guy who was number one on certain boards. Has this really rough game against the Salt Lake City Stars early in the year, the 9 turnover game. And it seemed like the perception of G League Ignite, the perception of him cratered quite a bit. Around that time, I wrote an article kind of defending him. I think that anytime you've got a guy with those kind of athletic tools, it's worth being patient, especially given that he is 18 and making this kind of leap in competition. Strong outing from him this week. The assist to turnover ratio is still negative, but it's getting a little better. It's been even over the last 5 or 7 games or so, scoring it a little bit more efficiently. What are your thoughts on Ron Holland, and where do you sort of have him at this point in the draft cycle?
Yeah, so right now I have him number 1.
Okay,
I
yeah.
think
Let's hear the
such
case.
A wide open draft. It's tough because I feel like if he was at Texas right now, where he was committed before turning to the Ignite, I think we'd be talking about somebody who is a superior athlete at his size. We'd be talking about, okay, first of all, major difference for him in one stat is you'd take 2 free throws instead of 1 every single time. I think that would be a much better chance to improve that. And I think with Ron Holland, a lot of it is, just process over results. And in the G League, that's not how it always works. A lot of it is results over process in some ways. So I think it was not necessarily the best fit for him. And I think he's kind of gotten hurt by it. But I saw him a lot in high school. I remember seeing him.
That's right. Yeah.
I never saw him in person for the USA FIBA youth teams, but I did see him in person in high school being in Dallas where he's from. I have a hard time seeing someone who I know he has a good work ethic and that's so important in today's game. At his size, with his two-way ability, I buy the jump shot coming along. I think it's better than the stats suggest. And really, if that's the big swing skill, there's other areas I think he's going to get a lot better at over the years too, especially as he gets stronger.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that something that's really sort of stood out as you hit on that free throw number in the G League, quote unquote, and I'm using kind of air quotes here for those that are just listening, the regular season, because the way that they split up the G League season, he's taking 5 free throws a game, which you look at and be that's pretty nice. But when you consider again on these attempts, the G League rules, you're taking 1. So in a normal setting, there's only certain periods of the game where you get 2 free throws in a G League game. Otherwise, you're looking at a guy who's taking 8, 9, 10 free throws a game. And that in and of itself is a skill when you're making 73.8% of them, like he has over that stretch. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say one thing. I pulled up his page on Synergy, and they combine all of it. So it's every bit of sample size. Yeah. And this includes some of the exhibitions that they did overseas, but he's already taken 124 free throws in how many games? 29. So let's do the math. given that he's taking 4.5 roughly free throws a game, that could be easily doubled. So sorry, just wanted to throw that in there. I think it's
for
important
sure.
context.
I agree completely. And one thing I wanted to pick your brain on, speaking of context, is one thing I've seen the people that are really high on Ron Holland, and to be frank, I've kind of had him more in that like 5 to 8 range. I've had him, I think, as high as 4 at different points, as high as 3. The thing that gets talked about by like the most ardent Ron Holland supporters is the high school role versus the role he has on Ignite. Always lauded for the defense, always lauded for the effort, the motor, straight line burst. Like, this is a guy that can just really blow by people in the half court. So just really good job getting past you, getting to the rim. And the rim finishing numbers have dwindled a little bit, but I actually like his touch at the rim a lot. Even like when he gets bumped off his spot, I really buy the half court finishing. Can you talk about having seen him play in high school, where he was a guy that was maybe a little bit more off the ball versus now almost being like a primary initiator a lot of the time? And how has that growth been from someone who's gotten to see a larger sample of him in up close and in person over the years?
Yeah, so he started when I saw him as a junior in high school. Really, I mean, I saw him actually as a sophomore through FIBA USA, and he was running more primary on-ball duties, but he was still kind of that guy who would cut from the corner, cut from the wings, and like take guys on 2 dribbles or less. But I think now he's obviously grown in that department. I still think the handle needs to get better, but that's also something where it's gotten better over the years. It's something that I imagine is a win, not if. The big thing, I think he's learned how to finish without dunking. A lot of times he goes for the home run swing, especially at the rim. That's mostly where we see it. And I think he's actually toned down a little bit there, because for a while he was supremely athletic. I have a couple of videos. If you search Map Draft Ron Holland, you'll see I have videos of him jumping over guys, like literally 2 times. It happened once this season in the G League and once 2 years ago in a high school game. He teammates with Anthony Black. And it's ridiculous. So the athleticism and how he uses it and how he's controlled his skill or his tools, really, I think is the big improvement. Like, he knows he's not necessarily the best athlete in every single game he plays now, but he knows how to channel it and make it a bigger strength for him than his opponent.
For sure. And I think that's the area where I've kind of had the hardest time with him, right? It is a very on-ball role for a guy who is probably more likely at best to be a second option on a really good NBA team. And the handle comes wide at points. And it's just a question of like, how concerned about this should I be at this stage where, is this something you can reel in, or is it something that because it gets wide, it gets away from his body, is that something that then limits him to more of a third option on a good team? Or is he more of just a complimentary starter type player? I get a little bit concerned with that aspect of his game. But I do think the shooting confidence is something that I've admired quite a bit. It seems like he's never lost confidence in his shot. I think that's going to be really important in terms of scaling up and roll for him. On catch and shoots, he's 29% over all those G League games, and 23% on off the dribble shots from long range. That's a little concerning because he's taken 30 of them. So that's probably hurting the sample. At the next level, it's going to be a lot more catch and shoot than off the dribble. But at the same time, the mid-range shot hasn't been great off of pull-ups either. 12 for 44 on those. The free throw numbers are good. What gives you confidence in saying, like, I feel that he will be a league average or better shooter?
Yeah, for me, I mean, the free throw percentage clearly isn't that bad.
No, it's solid, yeah.
And on top of that, like, I feel like watching him shoot, it's pretty smooth. He goes up straight. There's no like mechanical major flaws. There's some like stuff with his legs, but it's fixable things. And I think his shooting's just going to come down to work ethic. And I know he has a really good work ethic. I know people around his circle that have said this, and I really just believe that he's a hard worker. And I think that's really where it's going to separate him. And we've seen many players throughout the NBA's, I mean, really just the last 10 years, let's even go with that, where some guys didn't work hard and you notice their shots their jump shots never get better than average. And there are some guys who are mid-range shooters like Brook Lopez for a while who worked really hard to become a stretch big, and now he's one of the best. I firmly believe that work ethic and jump shooting like that's tied together very closely. And I know that's a strength for Holland, but like the work ethic, so I think that's going to come around. Plus, he has the touch.
How do you feel like he's been defensively this year? Because on one hand, I see the playmaking metrics. He's doing a good job. He's generating steals. He's using his length to get blocks. Can be really active with his hands and uses them well when he guards the ball at times. He is a great mover. The ground coverage is good. When it's a scramble setting, the speed is there. I feel like I've been a little let down by the point of attack defense at times, where it feels like he's a little too content to get beat, a little too content to play from behind at times. The effort's not always there. What do you make of that, or do you disagree with that assessment? Like I feel like at times I've been a little bit let down by how he guards the ball.
Yeah, I think just historically, like everywhere I've seen him before the G League, I think his defense has been really locked in. I think it's almost a nature of the G League that some of the stuff where it's like you're playing so many more possessions. I think it's hard to play hard every single possession on both ends, especially like he's one of the first options, if not the very first option most nights.
Yeah.
So I think I cut him a little bit of slack on that, like just given the tempo in the role. But when he's locked in, I feel like his motor is really strong. I think he wins a lot of plays that many other guys don't make, especially in the G League, where he'll dive on the floor. He just keeps himself in the plays a lot of on both ends, but I also think he has a lot of mobility. I mean, or versatility, excuse me. I mean, mobility as well, but versatility where he can really guard near the rim because he has long arms. He can get these long contests. I think that's huge. And the motor, like mostly being good, that's going to make a lot of ground up for him. The strength is really, I think, where I feel like that's going to be what separates him from getting to be a very good defender in the NBA. Is what I project him as. It's like a well above average defender, and turning that into being a great defender.
Awesome. And the last thing I just want to touch on with Holland is sort of the playmaking and the creation, because you talked about the assist to turnover. I thought it was really bad early in the year. I feel like he still has his warts. He still has his plays where it feels like he's really predetermined. More so, I feel like that almost leads more so into a shot selection where he's just like, I'm gonna take a shot on this play, and it doesn't matter if there's a double or if there's a lot of traffic. Like he's just kind of going up with it. I feel like he's been a little bit more fluid and a little more under control and poised as far as how he reacts if he gets all the way to the rim and he doesn't like his look, and maybe he keeps his dribble alive and goes out the other side, or maybe he's able to spray it out to somebody on the perimeter in a way that he wouldn't have done a few months ago. How do you feel overall about his development as a playmaker throughout this season?
Yeah, I've shared those same concerns. I feel like, especially early in the season, like when the team was bad, he was really, really struggling as a playmaker. I think his best strength, really, as a playmaker, is that he just knows how and when to make the extra pass at a very quick rate. Just knowing that in the NBA, everything becomes faster at every level from high school, you know. So I think that he's got that down. That's really big, but that's a simple skill. So for me, I had the same thing about decision making. For me, it was really just near the rim. We saw a lot of tunnel vision. We saw a lot of just predetermined moves. And I just think he gets a little bit too locked in on the rim. If he was able to see the corners out of the drives a little bit better, I think we'd be talking about a much different prospect.
For sure. I agree with you right there. Let's move on to our next guy, Johnny Furphy. Everybody's got Furphy fever right now. Johnny Furphy is the hot name. It feels like in draft circles. Kind of an interesting path for him. He's a guy who came from the Basketball Center of Excellence in Australia, which turned out a lot of great talent over the years, but goes to a Kansas team that doesn't have depth. So he's one of those guys who's gotten minutes all season, but just now is getting big time minutes. And it feels like the idea of playing him over Elmarco Jackson has been a really phenomenal one and has made everything better for the Kansas Jayhawks, and particularly for Furphy and his NBA draft stock. Right now, the counting numbers are not crazy. 7.9 points, 3.7 rebounds, half an assist, 0.6 steals, 0.3 blocks. But really, just over these past 4 games, has looked phenomenal. 15 against Oklahoma State, 13 against West Virginia, 23 points and 11 boards against Cincinnati. Tough loss yesterday to Iowa State, but 15 points and 6 rebounds on 5 for 8 shooting. Furphy is 6'9". He is mobile. He's got a high motor, and he can shoot the ball 41.2% from deep on the year. The other thing I think that is interesting is if you're just kind of looking through the box scores or just looking at the stats on paper, he's only got a 5% assist rate, but he is averaging quite a bit more assists per game since the turn in the calendar. So I'm going to pull this up here. Obviously, again, we're working with a lot of small samples, but over the last 7 games, Basketball Reference is going a little bit slow on me here. He had a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio recently over like these past 7 games. So Johnny Furphy, working a guy that's 6'9", that's shooting the ball, that can move, and that really competes. Is Johnny Furphy a guy that's moved into your first round?
Yeah, he's climbing because he's the ideal wing, right? Where he plays pretty solid defense, I think. Yep. He's 6'9". He shoots. I don't think the passing is anything stellar, but there is one area that I really like. This is one of my absolute, I'm trying to think of the right word for it, but like there's no way to say it without being weird. So I'll just say like one of my favorite traits, I guess, of a player is when they get the offensive rebound, where do they look? Are they looking only at the rim? Are they only looking at teammates? Like there's a fine line, right? Where it's you have to be aggressive, but you can't just kick everything out. Like if you're a big man, you want them to be the rim first for a lot of times. Now, if they're in triple teams, how do you recognize it? And Furphy is actually great at that. I've noticed, I think almost 3 or 4, he only has 10 assists, I think, on the year, but a good percentage, because it's only 10, have come off the offensive rebound. I want to say one was yesterday against Iowa State too, where he gets it in double coverage. He grabs the board and just immediately recognizes, hey, I got someone at the top of the key, or it's like one of the wings, and makes the right pass. Shooter makes it. And I love that stuff. I don't know if he necessarily has stuff off the dribble for creation for others, but at a minimum, there's something there where it's a clear example of, all right, I know where the next pass needs to go. How do I execute it is all he has to figure out, and like on a play-to-play basis. And I think he has that figured out
for sure. And I think that's kind of going to be what the NBA role is too, to a degree. Like I don't think you're drafting Johnny Furphy being like, this is the guy that's going to run the show, but playing alongside Dwan Wagner or Dwan Harris, playing alongside Kevin McCullough, getting to be in this role where he is just like, please connect well. And the fact that he's able to do that and not make poor decisions and keep the ball moving and make those plays on the offensive glass, I think he's done a really good job with. And I think part of the appeal for me too is that a lot of the stuff where I'm like, I didn't love that on that play for him, is stuff that feels really correctable. Like on defense, when he guards down, sometimes he'll be a little bit too upright, or sometimes when he's competing on the glass, maybe someone will outbody him, out physicality him, I guess I'll phrase it at times. But like, yeah, he's a 6'9" freshman. He's a little bit skinny. He's got a good body. He's going to fill it out. Like everything that he doesn't do well, it feels like it's something that I can live with, and I feel comfortable in an NBA strength and conditioning program or a coaching staff to develop pretty easily and pretty quickly, which I do think is part of the appeal. I also think on the field tip, like you mentioned, the offensive rebounding, where I see it with him too is just how he moves without the ball. Seems like a guy who knows how to get himself open on the perimeter, just move into those empty gaps, make it a little bit harder for his defender to cover ground. He's a guy who was willing to space it from NBA. He's not a guy that's going to hug the 3-point line the entire time. Like just little things like that that'll make it easier for his teammates, give him an easier passing angle, make it a little bit more difficult for his defender to recover back. That stuff that all really stands out to me is like that's a pro thinking skill that he's showing right there. So I really like that. To kind of turn the tables a little bit, and I guess almost take it negative in a way. What do you think separates Johnny Furphy in this rise compared to one like Matthew Mayer had during his junior season at Baylor, when all of a sudden it was like, hey, this guy's 6'9" and the shot looks really good, and he's got these good physical tools. Like, how do we know Johnny Furphy isn't Matthew Mayer?
I think there's a PC way to say this, and I'll say it very. I'm not trying to step on toes, because that's kind of the NBA's thing now. Is look, he's a freshman who plays within himself, who he does the right things all the time. Matthew Mayer did not do all the right things all the time. He was very much, I have the open three, but a guy's coming. What was that?
I was saying he made some really frustrating plays and like was a bad passer. He turned it over.
It's a much nicer way to say what I was thinking. And for me, it's just like Furphy knows what his role is, when to shoot, when to pass, when to dribble. That is a massive skill that every wing needs. It's not as simple as, oh, well, he can shoot the ball, therefore he's an automatic. He's a guy. You have to, like, there's a reason there's so many 40+% shooters in college basketball that never even sniff summer league. Like, there's a very real reason. And Matthew Mayer, I don't even know if he ever made summer league. Like, he might have made
He
one.
did. Yeah,
And
I think he was on like the Rockets summer league team or something.
yeah, that's right. I remember that. And it's just the same thing. He was like, oh, it's the Matthew Mayer show now. And Furphy is just not that. And I think that's the big difference.
All right. I love it. I love it. So we're going to throw it to a quick break. We're going to come back on the other end. We're going to talk about some guys that are kind of sleeper-ish, like not like the deepest cut sleepers, but guys that are more second round kind of candidates that I think we're both pretty interested in. So we'll be right back on the other side of this break. All right. So let's lead it off with some Baylor Scheierman talk. Just real quick, temperature check. How do you feel about Baylor Scheierman?
I think he's okay. I think he's actually kind of overhyped. I have him as a fringe draftable guy.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, he's cool. Like, I think he's fun.
Mm-hmm.
I still don't know how he translates up. I can't tell if I'm being caught up in aesthetics or not, like of just how he shoots and how he plays. But I mean, when you look at the stats, his impact's undeniable.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's completely reasonable. He's somebody where, like, I've kicked the tires with a lot of people recently just to kind of see. And I feel like your opinion is probably the one I get most often, which is he's fine. Like, yeah, maybe you draft him, maybe you don't. Like, that's that. I did not like Baylor Scheierman very much. And I did this Twitter poll where I was like, I want to write about a guy. Like, so the most frustrating thing about this draft cycle for me, as somebody who covers it week to week, has been, I feel like my gauge on who will and won't be in this draft has never been worse compared to the last several drafts. It's very difficult to know who's coming, who's going, who's staying. NIL has further complicated this because a lot of guys are going to get a lot of money to go back to school if they feel like they're not liking what their projection is. So I ran this Twitter poll and I was like, hey, pick my feature for next week. And it was all graduates. Like, I just give me one guy that, like, I can get some work on now that I know I'm going to have to think about come June. Honestly, I kind of wanted Jalen Williams from Auburn to win the poll, but Baylor Scheierman won the poll. And I was like, oh man, all right, whatever. I kind of came out of this liking Baylor Scheierman a lot more than I went into it. So the first thing I want to touch on is I did some research recently on what does an NBA rotation player look like. So I looked at guys who are the 6th through 8th man on the top 8 teams in each conference. And as a group, the average height was 6'5" and 3/4. The total 3-point field goal percentage for that group was 39.1%. And the average assist to turnover ratio in that group was 2.13 to 1.0. So when we're talking about guys that are in this kind of second round tier, a lot of the times the guys that are going to be like really, really good have been sort of figured out already. On the margins, we're looking for guys ideally that can get to 20 minutes a game and bring us real value as an organization. Baylor Scheierman, like, statistically kind of looks like that. He's 6'7". He's a career 39% 3-point shooter on really high volume. And he's a guy that has a near 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio on the year. He's at 3.8 assists to 2.1 turnovers. So Baylor Scheierman's production looks kind of what NBA teams go to off the bench. From a shooting standpoint, the other thing I love about him is just watching the NBA and watching shooters in particular and guys who have the shooting specialist label, but even non-shooters, but guys that are just on the court to provide spacing. The difficulty of the threes that they have to hit is really high. If you are considered a shooter of any sort, you're not just being left unattended. You've got to pump fake and sidestep. You've got to come off of movement. You've got to be able to hit with a hand in your face. Scheierman this year has hit 48% of his transition threes, 40.6% of his threes off screens, 53.8% of his threes as a pick and roll ball handler, 41.2% of his threes in handoff settings, almost 50% on the unguarded catch and shoots, but the NBA type of threes that he'll have to hit, he's hitting at a really high clip. The finishing numbers are okay, but he doesn't get to the rim a lot. The first step stinks, to be frank. Like, if every drive where he gets to the rim is sort of him having to work his way through or against another body. Like, he's just not going to leave anybody in the dust no matter how hard they close out. The playmaking is good. He's in like the 93rd percentile on pick and roll possessions this year. Very creative passer, very advanced. Some of the more adventurous stuff he's got to really reel in, because sometimes he'll make just like wild out of control passes that like will get him benched in the NBA. But generally the decisions are good. And I think when you're someone who's capable of making plays like that, it's a little easier to reel that in than like all of a sudden turn somebody into that type of playmaker. The defense is rough, so we'll get to that in a second. But offensively, how do you feel about Baylor Scheierman's overall game? And do you have concerns about any of the offensive stuff scaling up?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, just the NBA one-to-one stuff, it translates. Like, he's doing it. He has done it. There's really no suggestion that says, like, oh, this is actually a red flag. There's no, like, free throw, whatever. There's none of that. There's zero shooting indicators that are red flags. So, like, he's in a guy where I feel like, do you just say, I personally, I don't think his jump shot is that beautiful. I know a lot of people say it's like one of the prettiest. I don't see it. Like, if I saw him in the gym warming up, I'd be like, all right, I can give him like a little bit of space, you know, obviously assuming like height or something, like 6'6", 6'7", obviously I'm not, but like, I think for me, it's just, he doesn't get much lift. And that's something where I'm like, how's he going to shoot over NBA length consistently?
Sure.
But the thing is, you have 5 years of sample size of him shooting over 6'7" guys. Mm-hmm. He's probably fine. So there's a part of, I go back and forth on the offense, and I go, well, aesthetically, it doesn't look great. Statistically, it looks great. What do I do? And I've found just every single time, you got to trust the stats, because your eyes aren't perfect. And sometimes just the aesthetics don't matter. I mean, Tyrese Halliburton, like, has one of the weirdest looking jump shots ever. You would never know, but if you just looked at Basketball Reference.
For sure. For sure. So the defense is interesting. So what I will give him on defense is like his defensive BPM is 3.4. Like, and they don't get like crushed defensively in the minutes when he's on the court versus off the court. Like, there's very little difference. He's not a giant problem at the college level defensively. I like how he uses his arms and his hands on defense. Like, he's a guy who, like, some guys telling themselves their feet. Like Julian Strother, I always hated, like, he would play so far back off of guys. Scheierman will play back, but the way that he'll use his length to kind of put a hand in a guy's face, be ready to have his in fact that his like hands aren't down at his hips. Like, he's always making his presence known, even if he's like kind of obviously not the most comfortable with the defensive situation at the time. Really good defensive rebounder. And because he has that passing game, he's like this really good, just like grab and go early offense initiator kind of guy. Because he's 205 pounds, pretty strong, like not a guy that's going to get like plowed through. The feet are a problem. Really heavy footed, really struggles against directional changes. Right now, they kind of like let him be a roamer a lot of the time. Like, they'll just throw him on whoever the other team's worst shooter is and kind of let him roam around, which, like, if he was in that role, I'd kind of like to see better playmaking metrics, but his combined stock rate right now is 1.8, which, like, Cam Thomas was 2.1. Like, it is like one of the worst I've seen for an NBA prospect. So if he's in a role, and like he's had better stock rates in the past, but like, if we're talking about a guy who's like gets to kind of just roam around, you'd like to see him making more plays, but I think it's that lack of speed that really shows up in that front. Like, he just can't get places that quickly and make plays. How much does that concern you, and how do you feel about him defensively? Because like, he doesn't like stand out as a total liability, but then like you look into the numbers and like some like the bad plays are just bad, but then there's other times where it's like, oh yeah, he like can throw his chest on somebody and he like knows how to use his hands. It's not like the simplest, like, oh, he's just terrible at this, but there are indicators that this is going to be like the thing that's a huge problem for him.
So this is one of my concerns with Baylor Scheierman is, okay, if he's a great shooter, what happens? Because this happens to every great shooter, no matter how good you are. This happens to Steph Curry. Does not matter who you are, Duncan Robinson, whoever you want to call in this. What happens when he has a bad night? And that's where I have the shooting. And yeah, he can make some plays as a passer, but let's be real. If he's getting, I mean, I don't see him getting many pick and roll opportunities. That's not something.
Nope.
So I know you asked about defense. I'll get to that in a second, but this is kind of my issue is like, okay, imagine just De'Aaron Fox gets switched. Sure. He draws his switch. It's over. You just call the possession. You have to foul. You have to pray he misses. Settles for a three or misses at the rim, and he has good defense behind him. And that's where I worry, because we've seen a lot of these guys who are sharpshooters but cannot play any defense, and they're good playmakers, but the things they're good at as playmakers, they don't get the chance to do in the NBA. And that's kind of where I'm like, okay, what happens when you're not shooting well? Because at that point, you're just spot minutes, and that's what concerns me. But with his defense, like you said, he does a really good job of not getting bulldozed over, and I think that is a really impressive skill. And it is hidden, though, in college because the spacing, you can put 3 guys in, you can form a wall essentially at the mid-range mark, and much more easily than you can in the NBA, because Kalkbrenner can just camp out the paint. You can't do that in the NBA. So what's he going to look like defending in space where De'Aaron Fox is wiping his shoes and he's 5 feet behind the three-point line, gets his first step, and he's gone. And at that point, your best case is probably just hoping Fox is taking a tough layup and he meets the rim protector, but it's not that likely given that that's how they're going to draw it up. So for me, I just worry what's his impact on the game if his defense isn't there, and what happens if his shot's not there too. Like, is he just off the floor immediately?
Yeah. So that there's a lot to unpack there. I think those are really good points. One thing I kind of like to do with guys is I think sometimes people can almost trick themselves a little bit by getting too ahead of the game with like, is this a guy I can play in the playoffs? Because I think too many people missed on Walker Kessler. And I was too low on Walker Kessler because I think there was this concern that like, hey, Rudy Gobert just had a bad playoff. There's like a drop coverage big man. So like Walker Kessler's not going to be able to play in the playoffs. So I wouldn't draft him. And it's like, well, actually like Walker Kessler is really good. And he's a lot more likely to play in the playoffs than a lot of other guys that a lot of us like more than Walker Kessler. So I try not to focus too much on like what a guy can't do early and more focus on like what is the thing that gets them on an NBA floor. And for Walker Kessler, it was finishing, it was rebounding, it was protecting the rim and drop coverage defense. Where for Scheierman, it's going to be the shooting. I do think to your point there, like I've called it different things over the years. I guess the best name for it right now, like the most fitting would be like the Derek White factor of like how many different things can you do on the court? Like if you're having a game where the shot isn't falling, what else are you going to do? Like Derek White is the guy who like bad game. Derek White is still a guy I want on the basketball court for my team. Baylor Scheierman's Derek White factor is pretty low. If the shot is not falling, he is not really going to be providing any value for your team on a given night. And that's a real concern. The other thing I just want to pick your brain on real quick is like, how do you feel he stacks up compared to some of the other like recent sharpshooters that have come through the college ranks? Because I think like what he has over a guy like Young Jung Lee or someone like that is just the physical strength. I think that makes him pretty interesting, but I don't know that like even defensively or from like a strength standpoint, he's in the same tier as someone like a Sam Hauser. Or even like an Aaron Nesmith. Like you look at like how he's been able to just use his body to make a difference and kind of play up in those smaller lineups for the Pacers. Like where do you see him in that tier of like, I guess like Hyun Jung Lee, Nesmith, Hauser, Ben Shepherd, like these kind of guys.
Right. So I feel like one of his comps that it's very possible he could draw to is somebody who hasn't, I don't even know, he's played a handful of minutes in the NBA tops. And that's Joe Wieskamp, where I think there were a lot of people. I vividly remember somebody ran a Twitter poll and they said, would you rather have Corey Kispert in the first 20 picks or Joe Wieskamp, second rounder undrafted? And like it was 80-20. Everyone was like, oh, Wieskamp. And I worry that something like this, like where he's a great shooter in college and everything. And he did a lot of the same stuff offensively, not as good of a playmaker. Important.
Yeah, I would say significantly worse as a playmaker.
Way different. Yeah. But the defense, kind of the same thing. And I think for me, you look at that and it's like, okay, well, if he wasn't like, if Wieskamp can't make it, it gets really tough. Like it is really hard to stick as a shooter in the NBA. I'm trying to think of some other guys that like I'm looking through old draft boards and stuff where I'm like, okay, this is somebody who I really liked, but they never, and Wieskamp is probably the only one that comes to mind. But like, if there's him, there are others. Again, it's just not popping out. So I worry, what if he is Joe Wieskamp 2.0, or is he somebody who finds something else to hang his hat on? I mean, even Patrick Baldwin has really struggled to be in the rotation. He had way more hype around him, and he's a 6'9" shooter. Granted, way bigger concerns, but yeah, there are just guys that I think it's like, well, the playmaking, like that's the difference he has over those two guys for just as that example, but they all have the defense in common. that's kind of where I'm at, is what's the common trait here and where does Baylor separate himself?
Yeah, I feel like Isaiah Livers is like another guy where like the volume wasn't as high, but like the idea was fairly similar, but with better defense, and like it's not going great for him this year. Like this is like it's a really tricky archetype to be a guy who is like a shooter that doesn't have good athleticism. It's tricky. But I do think I ultimately came away a little bit more encouraged, just because I do think the stuff he does well is stuff that guys that do stick in these bench roles do. And that if nothing else, I think he's the guy that can linger as like a break glass in case of emergency kind of guy off the bench for a long time. Like a guy like Matt Thomas got a million chances. And I feel like it where Scheierman can be that and just sort of float around the NBA for a while. But yeah, I think Scheierman was the guy that I was a little too caught up in the negative stuff before, and then diving into his strengths. It's like, man, there's some really good stuff here.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Sorry.
So let's go to Anton Watson, because he's a guy that like Nathan Grubel and I argued about him a lot last year. Nathan loves him. I know he's got a lot of fans, and like I've always just kind of struggled with him. So give me the sales pitch on Anton Watson, and like where do you have Anton Watson on your board, and like what do you see the NBA sell for him being?
Yeah, so I actually I feel like I do this every year, and I'm really scared Anton Watson's going to be that guy this year, where I put somebody who ends up going undrafted in my top 30.
Yeah, nothing wrong
And
with that.
like some names in the past, I mean, Mike Miles, Raleigh Alkins, if you want a real throwback right there from Arizona.
There we go. Yeah.
So I worry that I'm coming victim to this again, but I'm watching Gonzaga every single time. And I watch him and I go, why would an NBA team not want this guy? He doesn't need the ball in his hands. He also, when he gets the ball in his hands, like how often do you find yourself going, what are you doing? Like I don't think over the years I've seen that. And I want to emphasize this. I've never been an Anton Watson guy until I wouldn't say till midway through last year, where I was like, okay, I kind of get it. He's gotten better every year, I would say. And ultimately he's just a connector. I wish he was a little bit taller. I thought he was like 6'10". He's 6'8" at best. But the motor is insane. The feel for the game is off the charts. He's really, really versatile, and he does all the right things, I think, on defense in terms of somebody who creates turnovers. He's making the right reads. He doesn't, miss his rotations or anything like that. He has a really good, if he's in the zone flash, he can kill you with that one dribble floater. I think his defense is just phenomenal. I can't rave about it enough. He has insane balance. I think that matters. He also has quick hands, but he's also a really good finisher. The only question is how real is the jump shot improvements. Just looking at the stats this year, he's up from the first 4 years. Let's see, I'm combining it. He was a 25% three-point shooter on 1 attempt per game with 61.5% from the free throw line. This year, the free throw numbers aren't great, but the form looks a lot better. And just in volume, he took 100 threes before this year. He's taken a third of that this year already, and he's made 40%. So I feel like there's improvements there to actually build on. He may not be a shooter right away, but if you're willing to wait 1 year for that to come along, I mean, Jonte Porter's been around for 4 years and finally got his chance this year. Why can't Anton Watson get that? And honestly, probably earlier. And I think that he just has the two-way value that as a connector off the bench.
Yeah, so there's a lot that I like about him. I love his touch inside the arc. Like you mentioned the finishing. Like he said, 4 of his 5 college seasons where he's over 60% on twos. Like that's phenomenal. Always been a low volume guy from deep. Always been a subpar free throw shooter. Career 61% from the free throw line. Good rebounder. Love how he plays on the offensive glass too. Like just a phenomenal little things player. Like is going to set good screens, is going to get to plays on the glass you don't think he's going to get to, is going to bust his tail on the defensive end, make plays over there, but still do it in a way that's like fundamentally sound and not, he's not going to make plays where he like gambles and then a team gets a layup because Anton Watson was trying to like pad the stat sheet. Like that's not who he is. My concern with him is just like, the value proposition of like expending draft capital on him, because like why would I draft Anton Watson when I can sign Trendon Watford on a minimum? Like that's like kind of like my issue with him is it's like I feel like there's a lot of these like tall, good feel guys that like don't have enough of the shot, or like sometimes it's like the more so the defense or the athleticism that like they never quite carve out a role. But they're always around because like they're really competent. Like they're not going to get you killed. I feel like you could throw like Delano Banton and like that kind of mix as well. Like what makes him like, I guess, why do you believe in him to the point that it's like, yeah, I would spend a draft pick on him, and I really think that I can get him over the top in my developmental system?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like he's somebody who, again, it's just that impact, right? Where it's everything you want in a forward off the bench, where he's going to lock guys up. I think he creates turnovers. He makes it very easy to be a positive player in the league. Like he doesn't have to do much to do that. Like he just creates transition opportunities. And as we all know, transition offense is one of the very most, if not the most efficient offense you can run. And I think that's huge. Like that's something that makes the team better. Also, just like I know the shot, I mean, just reading some of the comments in here, I know a lot of people don't, they're saying, why would you take Watson over Coleman Hawkins? Things like that, just to kind of tie those two together. I don't think Coleman Hawkins does that much in terms of volume. I don't think he can really score. Whereas Watson, I mean, he's had 2 games where like he had one against UCLA, which was unreal, where he went 14 to 15, and then against Santa Clara earlier, like 2 weeks ago.
Game.
Yeah, 14 of 18. And just some of the things he does, it's just like the smarts. I really do feel like he's an exception to the rule with the free throw percentage and the shooting, where he's somebody, if you just look at the work ethic and how he's gotten better over the years, I really think he's somebody that trend's not going to stop in college. Granted, he's 24, he'll be 25 at training camp. Not the only guy to be that old and thrive in the NBA.
For sure. Yeah, I think for me, I just have a hard time with like how many similar guys are on the margins in this mold that like for me it makes me a little scared to take the top 60 plunge on a guy like that. Where like I feel more like like on an E10, why not? Is like kind of how I've always viewed him.
What if he was your undrafted free agent, you get him on a 2-way, like, and then he thrives? Like, because that's why I feel like the most likely outcome is I'm not expecting him to get a first round pick by any means, even though I have him in my first round grade right now. But I do think he is somebody that's going to severely outplay expectations.
I think that's definitely possible. I think the other thing is like, I think once you get up to that age, and I think there's something like we saw Demoy Hodge run into, is it's like you're almost competing more with the other 24, 25-year-olds in the NBA, where it's like, am I going to kick the tires on him, or am I going to see like maybe if there is something left to Chumo Kiki? You know what I mean? Like that sounds like kind of nuts, but it's like those are other guys that are his age that like an NBA team could consider. So like I've always felt better about like I'd rather see him on the E10 first versus like just jump into the 2-way with him. Which, man, we're these are the conversations that we have here on Draft Sickos. So, and that's why I'm glad I could have on a guest who can get this kind of weeds with us here. So we're going to talk some sleepers. I loved your sleepers this week, by the way. So very excited to get to these guys. So stick with us. We'll be right back on the other side of the break. All right. So it is time for the Sicko session. So in this part of the show, we like to take a couple guys that we've been interested in as sleepers recently. Let's kick it off with you. Which of your guys did you want to go with here first?
Let's start with Sion James. I'm a huge fan, and I'm seeing him in person in Dallas on Thursday. So let's start with him.
Yeah, let's do it. So Sion James is a guy that I like a lot. He is a 6'6" guard who can guard anybody. He can kind of guard guards, guard forwards, guard wings. He's having a great season for Tulane. 13.8 points per game on 45.9, 40.7, 67.8 splits. But always been a do everything guy. About 5 boards a game. Almost an over 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, 2.8 assists. To 1.2 turnovers, 1.7 steals, 0.7 blocks. Just a guy that immediately physically you look at and you're like, that guy looks like an NBA player, but has really had some nice developments. Talk about that. So what have you seen from him over this past year? That's like, I think you've kind of been on him for a while, if I'm not mistaken. Like, what do you think it's been that like this year has kind of like really kicked it into overdrive?
So I think he's been about the same this year. I think the defense has been something that teams avoid him with now. So the flashes aren't necessarily there. But the big jump for me is he's become really confident in taking shots off the dribble. And honestly, he's not that bad at it. There was one play, I wish I could remember who it was against. It was a few weeks ago. It was one of the first conference games, maybe like Wichita State or something. And he took like, it was just a very pro move. He gets the catch, immediately takes the step back, extremely open because of it. And it's things like that we just haven't seen. I also think just his overall scoring mentality has improved. A lot of times last year, he was going for that. Like, honestly, I know we talked about him a moment ago, like the Coleman Hawkins style, where it's like, I'm going to make someone else make the scores, like the scoring plays, excuse me. Yeah. I'm going to just facilitate and be content not being the guy who's actually putting the ball in the hoop. But now he's taking that different mentality and going, all right, I am a scorer now without Jalen, just gave me Cook, I think.
Yeah, Jalen Cook was the point guard last year.
And now he's at LSU. And I really like what he's done in that regard. He's kind of handed that off Kevin Cross. Him and they play very similar like games. But I think with Sion James, it's that he's a 6'5" positionless defender. He is strong enough to take anybody in the post. At least as long as they're under like, a certain height. He's not going to guard Embiid by any means, but he is somebody that's strong enough. You look at like a Grant Williams type in terms of like how he plays on defense. I know Grant has had a terrible year. I'm sorry, Mavs fans, if you're listening to this, but with him, I think if you hope that, hey, jump shot is there, the passing is 100% there. He's way better at that than it's so smooth. It is insane how he can pass on the move, pass from standstill. He just sees the floor perfectly on both ends. And that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, to me, he's always been like one of those everything but the shot guys. And like the shorter you are, the more daunting that is. Like Anton Watson, it's like, okay, well, like, yeah, like there still might be a path for him if he doesn't shoot because of all the other things that he's going to do and being 6'8". Like it's just easier. With Sion, it was always tough because he's probably 6'5". But just a guy who was like, he's like a snowball rolling down a hill is how I described him when I covered him for No Stone Unturned the year before this. Like his momentum as he drives to the basket, just like gains steam and he can plow right through people. He's got that nice first step, but like he is so sharp with how he sees the floor. Like he is able to just read the game at a really high level, but it was always a little bit harder for him to get those advantages and to get inside because he was a low volume 3-point shooter. And this year, previously, his high in terms of 3-point attempts for 100 possessions was 3.9. This year, it's up to 5.9. You mentioned the shooting off the dribble, but even some of these plays where he's coming off a handoff and like just kind of tucking himself behind Kevin Cross and letting it fly from the NBA 3-point line is stuff that you never would have seen from him. And I just love the assertiveness off the catch with the shot this year. There's so much less like, I got it. Am I going to take it? No, I'm going to put it on the deck for a little bit. He's getting these openings and he's just taking them and shooting the three. So I'm liking Sion James. Do you think he's a guy that could work himself into draftable territory? Because I ran a query the other day where it was like all these like just wide ranging like guys that produce in a lot of areas. And he was on there. There's a lot of other guys that had been drafted. I don't know if the momentum's there, but would you consider him in the second round? Because I think he's getting to that point.
Oh, I would if I was I was a GM. But I think there's two things that really hold him back. One is a 6'5" positionless guy who has at best a mediocre shot.
Yep.
Be worth drafting. Fair question, I think. And secondly, I think people look at the team like Tulane hasn't been very good this year. They should have been a lot better. And he hasn't been to the tournament. I think that's going to kind of be something that, I don't know, that's a fair criticism, but it is something that that I really just do think teams are going to be like, well, he didn't lead them to being the best, version of themselves, even with Kevin Cross. I think there's other things though. Like I'm not a big fan of that, but I do think it's something that's going to hold him back.
Yeah. I think that's completely reasonable. I think anytime you're coming from, and the A10 is not like, the American isn't like the smallest league, but I think anytime you're on a mid-major team and the record's not great, that's always something that can set off some alarm bells in front offices. Let's jump back to the G League and let's talk about Malik Lewis for a moment. This is one of my guys I want to touch on this week. He is playing for the Mexico City Capitans as a draft eligible prospect. He was part of that G League international draft class. He is extremely interesting to me. He's a guy that I checked in on early in the year. And I was like, oh yeah, like I get the idea of Malik Lewis. He's 19 years old. He's 6'8". He can move a little bit. He really defends. He really gets after it on the glass. He's a fantastic rebounder. But just a guy who's 6'8" and can move and doesn't make a lot of mistakes. Now he is starting to score the ball a lot more. He is up to 11.1 points per game in the regular season portion of the G League schedule on 54, 35, 82 splits. I'm really liking what I'm seeing. Another one of those guys who's just kind of mistake free. He's got a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. Phenomenal defender, NBA frame. Just a guy that the more I'm thinking about, and he's on a bit more of an ideal situation than the Ignite because the Capitans have a good roster around him. But I just see a 6'8", 19-year-old in the G League who's playing the game the right way and has a lot of physical tools that I like, and I'm loving him in the early second round. What's been your opinion of Malik Lewis so far?
Yeah, I think he, like you said, he's an intriguing guy. I feel like these guys that don't play on the Ignite get so overlooked.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think Malik Lewis is a little bit better than, and I just drew a blank, Perez. He was on Mexico City last year. Josel Perez. Mm-hmm. He was like, nobody knew that this guy was draft eligible. And it's not like he was some, hot commodity. He was a guard. Yeah. He played very good defense also. But it is very interesting, like him and I'm going to butcher the name, but I think it's Teofil Leonard. He was at Middle Tennessee.
Yeah, Teofil, yep.
Mm-hmm. He's great. But, I think some of these guys get absolutely hidden. With Lewis, it was really shocking to me to see his shooting numbers after watching him shoot. And this is another thing, like, am I just going way too much off the aesthetic? Like, Ben McLemore is a prime example of this guy, one of the prettiest shots you'll ever see, but dude couldn't make a three to save his life half the time. So I think that I buy it, especially with the free throw percentage being at least respectable, and he makes the right plays and moves, and he's built very well for his position. I'd like to see the shot get a little bit better down the stretch, like just have like a major flash of it. Like even if it's like 3 weeks of just hot shooting, I think that's enough. And I think his stock will really start to pick up. But yeah, he's somebody who just like, I just think it's something where the G League doesn't advertise its non-Ignite prospects. The last time they have was probably PJ Hairston.
Yeah.
Like, that's not good. That's in the NBA. And
because they had that dude on the Ontario Clippers last year, who was like one of those guys who I think is still there this year.
I know who you're talking about, and I, for the life of me, could not remember. The
pronunciation is difficult on that one. But yeah, he was one of those guys that I would hear from either teams or players in workouts, like, oh man, like this, I was in a workout with this guy, and he's fantastic, and like didn't really have a lot of buzz, and ended up not entering the NBA last year. But there's a lot of talented guys that are draft eligible in the G League that are not on the Ignite. Let's hop over to Boogie Ellis, who is the other guy that you kind of brought to the table this week. Boogie's got some fans. Like there are some real sharp people that I know that are like big on Boogie Ellis. I was starting to kind of feel it at the beginning of the year. And then USC has this tough start, but then I look at the numbers and it's like Boogie's still cooking. Like he's still been good despite not having a big man that can like catch and dunk the basketball. What are you seeing with the 6'3" graduate guard Boogie Ellis?
Hey, he needs every inch he can get on that height. Absolutely. I don't know if he actually is 6'3". I'll leave it at that.
What he's listed at. I'm just going to list tonight.
I think for me, I have watched way too, like, this is probably the name that puts me as a draft sicko, which is I've watched way too much Boogie Ellis over the years. Yeah. He's somebody who I didn't like in Memphis. He transferred to USC, and I was like, oh, maybe there is something here. But the thing that's really stands out to me, I love, like, it's hard for me to notice some of these things, I think, without having a tip of people who are actually behind the scenes. But the maturity that Boogie Ellis has taken this year is so obvious. Like, when he's only played a handful of minutes with Collier and Bronny, but to be a fifth year senior, not sixth, right? Like to be as old as he is, right? Most of those guys, if you go across college basketball, I mean, I know for a fact, I can't say who they are, who I've heard of this happening, but there are plenty in like Big 12 schools, for example. I'll leave it at that over the years that I've heard of where they go, well, this freshman just got all the shine. Where's my shine? And they just get very almost butthurt over not getting the minutes and the touches that they deserve. But Boogie Ellis is absolutely phenomenally rolled into that role. And I think he's just really matured and shows that, like, hey, I can play whatever role is asked of me. Not much of an on-ball guy this year. And my goodness, I didn't even notice this was his numbers right now. Granted, he's missed some time. 45% from 3 on 7 attempts per game, and the free throw percentage has always been at least average. Like, that's a real skill. I don't know how good of an actual decision maker he is. That's the absolute fatal flaw swing skill for him. But I really, really do think that there is something to be said of, okay, his maturity is there. He has a real skill he can hang his hat on. He's a good scorer. At the minimum, I think he's going to be a G League All-Star.
Yes, I was going to say, I think Boogie is going to really benefit from the fact that, like, guys get better at that at the NBA level and in the G League. Like, the fact that he's not coming in is like a negative on the decision-making front. Like, do I wish he was better? Yeah, but I'm never overly frustrated by the decisions that Boogie Ellis makes as a lead guard. I do worry about the finishing with him. Like, that's like the big thing. It's like he's like a sub 50% rim finisher. But man, like, he could just really shoot the ball. Like, just looking at the synergy numbers right now, like, all my notes on him are just about like the deep pull-up range. He's like in the half court, he's making like 51% of his pull-up threes. Like, it's really hard to guard a guy like that. And then you spend some time in the G League, you hone that decision making. And when teams have to guard you that far out and they know that you're that kind of a pull-up threat, like, it can really open up those passing opportunities. And that can make it a little bit easier to get downhill when a big man has to cover a lot more space and you have a lot more time to get past him. Yeah, and I think the other thing I like about Boogie compared to some of the other graduates is that, like, he's been good before. Like, this isn't a case of a guy who's like 24, 25 years old, all of a sudden being a lot better. Like, this is a guy who had a really good season last year and came back for graduate year. And despite less than ideal circumstances at USC this year, is still performing really well. Is he a guy that you would consider in the second round, or is this more of like an undrafted two-way kind of guy for you?
He's probably
undrafted. I feel
better
about him. Okay,
I think he's undrafted. It's just like guards are a dime a dozen.
Yep.
And also, like, just to one thing, add on what you said, the finishing ability, everything near the rim is what scares me with him. I don't think he can really finish against bigs very well. And also, like, he has to get better finding ways to finish around and through contact. But he also just doesn't get to the rim very well. So how he actually creates those rim points, whether it's free throws or layups, like, that's the one. Like, I know I said fatal flaw is probably the point guard ability, but that's it. Like, I think all of his biggest issues, if he could just be a 3-level scorer, there's such a clear path for him in the NBA compared to him being this sharpshooter who's like a mediocre point guard, not a good finisher.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's spot on. Last guy I want to touch on, had to stay local for Chicago's Big Ten team, which is located in Evanston, Illinois, rather than Chicago. Brooks Barnhizer from Northwestern. He has really started to kick it into gear. He was the guy that I kind of had on my watch list prior to the start of the season because he finished hot last year. And then the start of the season, it was like, nah, he's kind of the same guy again. But now he's been hot, and he's a big part of their turnaround. He is a 6'6" forward with the largest calves that I've ever seen on a basketball player. He's averaging 14.7 points per game on 45, 36.5, 75 splits. Good rebounder, 6.6 boards per game, a real physical fourth on the glass. Another really smart decision maker, 2.9 assists to 1.4 turnovers. Again, that mental sharpness and that giant frame of his carries over on defense, where he's averaging 2 steals and 0.8 blocks per game. Barnhizer is super, super crafty. He can really put the ball on the deck. He's always had this really polished mid-range scoring game. The question was always going to be, is it something he could scale out to 3? And now we're on year 3 of him continuing to expand that range. I do think he's probably a guy that's going to need another year. And I would say my concern with Barnhizer is that while he is super strong, his lateral agility is kind of shaky, where it's one of those things where it's like, you're probably best from a lateral standpoint guarding 4s, but from a size standpoint, you're probably better off guarding 3s. Like, people say like the 3-4 tweener doesn't really exist anymore, but it does, and it looks like Brooks Barnhizer. But I think with one more year of just improved off the catch shooting, and I think he's done a good job, like coming off of screens and things like that this year. Another guy's just been more willing to let it fly. I love what I'm seeing out of Barnhizer, and I think he's a guy next year that can work his way into that second round mix.
Yeah, I have a buddy who's big with Northwestern, and he was like, in August, he was like, watch for him. He's gonna be our guy. And I think he definitely has taken a jump. If you watch, I want to say it was the Ohio State game, it is such a weird thing, but like the way he sees the spot up shooters as a shooter, the way he does it, like with the extra passes, how he's creative in it. He'll make the extra skip pass. It's not just like here's easy read left or right. It's over, above, through. I do think there is something to be said on that. Like his playmaking has been really impressive this year. I know he has almost very close to a 2-to-1 assist ratio, and last year it was almost even at 1-to-1. And I think that's something where it's like those kind of plays, you see that him processing the game and it slowing down for him, it really comes into fruition.
Yeah, and I think like I know a lot of guys get this compared, and it's like dangerous, and I don't want to say like they're the same player, because there is a talent and a really just like a mobility and athleticism difference, but like the way that he could kind of herky jerky create and pull up in the mid range and not screw up reminded me a little bit of Jaime Jaquez, like where it's just like he's got this ability to sort of create for himself and get to his spots. And I think when you're able to do that and score off the dribble in the mid range that way, it gives me a little bit more confidence. Like we've seen Jaime hit the three well in the NBA this year. Like I think when you're able to make those difficult twos, it gives me a little bit more belief in you expanding that out to three. And I think it also gives me a little bit more belief in like, if you are consistently able to make your man uncomfortable, that's going to start to allow you to get those reps to better recognize what the rest of the defense is doing and to make those reads that you talked about. And I think those are the things that have been really encouraging as far as that. How do you feel about him defensively? Because like the playmaking numbers are awesome. And like sometimes I watch him and I'm like, oh yeah, like he's got this guy like in the doghouse. Like this guy can't go anywhere against him. And then there's other plays where I'm like, man, his feet look slow there. What would you say like your concern or excitement level is with the defense?
I'm honestly pretty neutral. I haven't watched him that closely on threes. I remember, I want to say it was a recent game. I want to say it was like Terrence Shannon or something that he went against. And I just remember him like, it was a simple, he walked into a three and he was just very off balance, but I don't have much of a take, honestly, on his defense right now.
For sure. That's reasonable. Most people aren't. Yeah. This is a sicko session. These aren't guys that in every case that we're just grinding day in and day out. That's more the top of the class guys. But yeah, I think that'll put a bow on it. Where can people find you if they're not already kind of following you on social media and following your work?
Yeah, appreciate it. I honestly, everything I do is one of two places. It's at mavsdraft.com. I've started posting more just game breakdowns. Anything I watch, I try and like I don't know how to really describe it. I watch a lot, but like there's somewhere I'm like, okay, when I see a breakthrough in a player, I think that's the best way to put it. I post anything on my site, just film breakdown saying like, all right, this is why I think he's, good decision maker, things like that. I have some high school stuff with that. EYBL starts up in a month and a half. I'll be covering that. So honestly, any level of basketball, NBA, college, EYBL, at least like in America, I think I've got it on lock. And then also Locked On NBA Big Board to tie that one together. You can find me. I'm with Rafael Barlow. So just look for whenever you see Mavs Draft on there. Those are my episodes.
Yeah. And I think just again, to drive it home for anyone who somehow is not following you at this point, I love the work that you do. And I think it's so important to follow basketball at every level. And I think a lot of times guys can miss things when they're not paying as close of attention to NBA. And I think that you do a great job of kind of blending all of those worlds and being able to holistically approach the game of basketball. I think it's something that a lot of people can miss out on. And I also love in the updates that you do on your site, it's not a lot of fluff or nonsense. It's very straight to the point. And a lot of times if you post about a guy and I didn't get to see that game, it's a really nice way to just like, hey, what did this guy do in this game? And just kind of get those notes and see it. So a pleasure to have you on the show. Make sure you're following him on Twitter at Mavs Draft. Make sure you're following me at Boundboards. Make sure you're following No Ceilings NBA on Twitter as well. Subscribe to NoCeilingsNBA.com for our daily written content. I've got my Baylor Scheierman article going up tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. Until next time, we'll see you guys later.